Welcome, everyone, to our special Picard Week episode of the Promenade Merchants podcast. It is episode 65, and do not adjust your audio sets. This is Heather Kirby leading the discussion today alongside my still great co-host, David Majors. How are you doing, David?
What's up, Heather? What's going on? Hello, merchants. Hello, listeners. And big thanks to Strange New Pod for having us on to be a part of Picard Week. And Heather, we've got a couple of great guests to join us.
We do. We are super excited to be a part of Captain Picard Week for the second year in a row. And because it is episode 65, we had to bring along a couple of guests to join us because every 5 episodes we bring someone on to talk about Star Trek with us. And for this very special episode, we have the Duras Sisters, who spent plenty of time on the Promenade with Quark, I think. But they are joining us tonight on the Promenade to talk about Picard. Hello, Ashlyn and Rhianna. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Hello. We're so thrilled. Thank you for having us. We're so excited to be talking about this excellent topic.
Yes, I am so excited to lead this discussion because I sort of came up with this topic, and so David looked at me and said, okay, it's your idea. You got to run with it.
Yes.
But anyway, the title of our discussion tonight is Picard and the Women. So it's going to be a discussion about Picard and his working relationships with the strong women around him. It is Captain Picard Week. We got to talk about Picard. But the one thing I love about TNG and also Star Trek Picard is the amazing women characters that are on the show along with them. So for anyone who has not listened to our podcast before, we do have a bit of a setup. We start with old business, which is anything from the beginning of TOS into the Kelvin universe. And then we move on to new business, which is what's currently airing right now on Paramount Plus. And then we move on to upcoming business, which is what's looking forward. So for this discussion, we have broken it down into our 3 segments. Starting with old business, we're going to focus on TNG and the wonderful women of TNG, specifically Deanna Troi and Beverly Crusher, but there might be a few other ladies thrown in there in our topics of discussion. So starting out, Deanna Troi, our favorite half Betazoid counselor. She has, I think, from the very first episode, An Encounter at Farpoint, really shown that Picard values her opinion and her views and the feelings she gets from people. So I will ask you, Rhianna or Ashlyn, whichever one wants to take this first. This is our first time having 2 guests, by the way.
Awesome.
Yeah. What do you think about Encounter at Farpoint and how we initially meet Troi and how she gets along with Picard in that episode?
Yeah, I really love getting to start with the pilot, always in a discussion. It's so great to sort of lay down how they establish these relationships. And I think with Picard, there's definitely a mutual respect going on here. And I think that for counselors or people who are in more like compassionate, like emotional fields, it can sometimes be seen as like a lesser field or something to be like kind of looked down upon, but Picard never acts that way. And maybe there's some instances later on where he seems to dismiss her, but I feel like at least in this pilot episode he is just very clear about his respect for Troi and just following her lead a lot of the times. We see Riker doing this too throughout the episode. A lot of pretty much all the cast is just adhering to what Troi is saying about this entity, who turns out to be the entire station, all of that stuff. So her compassion really guides the way. And I love that Picard is already fostering a crew to have that compassion and to be listening to her.
Thank you, Rhianna. I also just want to note that this is the first time, like in the pilot, this is the first time that all of them have been working together with Picard. He is fresh on the ship. We see him literally in his first moments. And so he's actively getting used to the crew as the plot is unfolding. And I think it says a lot. I mean, I haven't checked the Starfleet database, but I don't know how many counselors are Betazoid, like from Betazoid. So I don't know how many have empathic powers like she does. And I know because she's half, she can't like read minds. But I think they make it very clear from the beginning that this extra benefit of her being able to tell the emotions and intent of other people is really valued by Picard, because he has her sit on the bridge for the whole show. Like, Troi has her own chair, and
Oh yeah.
people have like so many opinions about Troi and like her place on the bridge, but it, like Rhianna was saying, it's very clear that he respects her opinion and he trusts her to the point where she goes down on a lot of away missions. He really relies on her to see, is this person being truthful? So and the pilot sets up their relationship perfectly, I think.
David, your thoughts on Encounter at Farpoint and Picard and Troi?
I think that Encounter at Farpoint in particular, you really get to see Jean-Luc willing to listen to his crew, even though he's meeting them for the first time, because they're going to this strange adventure in the very first episode where a lot is happening and nobody really knows what's going on. And in the case of Counselor Troi, her empathic skills really come in handy, and you really see what she's capable of right away. And that's really testament to the production and how it was put together. Usually with TV shows, you usually have what's called a Bible, where you get kind of all of the character traits and everything that makes a show what it is. And it's clear that they put a lot of work into making Deanna Troi what she is, and making it show how important of a character she is, giving her a seat on the bridge, having Jean-Luc get her counsel on the regular and throughout the series. I remember in one of the movies, I believe it was the movie where her and Riker got married. This is a line that always really stuck with me. Picard said that he's understood better parts of himself because of Deanna Troi. And that line really stuck with me, because that's really what a counselor and someone who is empathetic and listening to you is supposed to do. It's supposed to help you understand yourself and grow and evolve and be a better person. And for Jean-Luc to acknowledge that Deanna Troi helped him in that regard is a real testament.
Yeah, I think I agree with what all of you have brought up, that really Encounter at Farpoint, seeing her being right there next to him through a lot of the stuff that they go through, like not just what happened at the station, but also their initial meeting with Q, when they're in the judgment chamber. Like he really looked to her a lot for her opinion, her views, her feelings on things. And it was really important to set that up right away in the first episode, to see how much he respects her as a person and her traits that losing my words here, but her strength of character in that very first episode. So one of the other things I mentioned that I think really highlights how their relationship has grown throughout the years is the movie Generations, because in there was when Picard loses his immediate family members, and the person who actually gets that there's something wrong with him and goes to him and that he opens up to is Troi. And I think that shows how close their relationship evolved over all 7 seasons and into the movies. So Rhianna, what did you think about that?
Yeah, this is such a beautiful and heartbreaking scene in Generations. I think I always sort of forget it's there because I don't want to remember this horrible thing that happened to his family.
Yes,
Like,
yeah.
we know that we've seen them in the episode Family, and so that was really hard news to get. But I think Troi is always such a great pillar of strength. I think, you earlier talking about the trial scene in Encounter at Farpoint, and how I think it's really interesting that Troi is always sort of the middle ground. She gets to kind of be the grounding force between maybe like Data's. Oh, sorry, there's some dogs. Maybe Data's like very logistical, like math brain, and Tasha's very like emotional and like angry side. Troi is really that like focal point in the middle that is grounding both sides. And I think in Generations as well, she is that grounding point for Jean-Luc, because this is like an impossibly hard situation to deal with, on top of the extreme movie stakes that they're piling on Picard. And so I think truly he would not be as like able to compartmentalize and get through it if he didn't have Troi there, and he would bury that until it would come out later in a lot of an uglier way. And Troi is so good at sort of easing that out of him.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with you, Rhianna. I think also it says a lot about how much he appreciates Troy's input, because he gets the news, I think, when they're still on the holodeck. He's still dressed up in his outfit from being on the ship, and he gets the news, and then he just completely shuts down. Like, he can barely focus. He's yelling at everyone else on the bridge, like, I will be in my ready room, don't bother me. And that is so unusual. Everyone knows what's going on, but he's such a private person, and he shoves these kind of feelings down so much. And finally, like, it just shows like how much Picard really trusts her, because he's able to get this off his chest and work through it with her. And I think it's a really beautiful scene. It's one of my favorite Troi scenes, so I'm really glad we get to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of my favorites as well.
Mm-hmm.
David, what are your thoughts on the evolution of Picard and Troi's relationship from Encounter to Farpoint to where we see them in Generations?
I really think that throughout the whole series, she really is an underrated part of the crew, because you really see in several episodes just how important she is to the episode, to whatever is the mission of the day, and her empathic powers really come into play a lot. And just as a character, she has a unique position of being not just a counselor, but also someone who, I guess, is in a position of authority to a certain degree. And it really shows that they took a lot of time to really show that character some respect that grew over time. And I think that was really well done.
All right. Does anyone else have any specific Troi moments they want to mention before we move on? Or
Yeah, I wanted to talk briefly about the scene in The Child. This is the episode in TNG where Troi is impregnated, like against her will, essentially, by this alien. Just a crazy beginning of season 2, I believe, episode.
Yep.
And there's about a like 3-minute scene. It's really short, but they're all having a conference, essentially talking sort of about Troi's right to abort the baby versus carrying it to term and raise this alien child as her own. And a lot of people are in the room trying to make decisions for her. And Picard is just like silently listening to all of this. And then Troi says at the end, I'm going to keep this baby. And Picard says, well, that's that, and it's something so subtle that I just really wanted to bring up. And actually, Ashlyn was reminded me of that episode, because it's just like one I don't often watch because I think it's very like cringe the rest of the episode. But that scene in and of itself is really beautiful, because it's the subtle way of Picard supporting Troi, where Worf was, trying to make a decision for her, and Riker's arguing about this, not even talking directly to her. And Picard just is waiting for her to make that decision and not having any of his input or his moral values or whatever he thinks is right. It's about her body and her choice. And I love that he accepts that. It's really such an amazing and beautiful moment.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because when most people think about that episode, and especially that scene, a lot of people focus on the fact that, oh, there's a whole bunch of men here talking about what Troi should do with her body. But Picard isn't one of them. Like, you make a good point of that. Picard's not one of them. He's sitting there listening to him. And as soon as she states what her intentions are, then he shuts the conversation down and supports her. And that's an excellent example of how he values her voice.
It even extends to her uniform, because she's not wearing regulation uniform until Jellicoe comes on, like in Chain of Command, which I mean, you can also argue this is the like producers. They want like a sexy woman in a cat suit in Star Trek. So
yeah.
I don't know if
You know,
that's
as a
really,
little
like, Troy's
kid,
wishes.
I never considered that. Just as a little kid, I never thought of that. I just always thought, okay, she's the counselor. She has a different job, so she doesn't have to wear a uniform. I never considered that. I don't know.
Yeah,
I always thought it was no big deal.
he never enforces it, and literally until another captain's like, we want everyone in uniforms here. So it's something else. Picard is just like letting people do their thing.
Exactly.
So true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to briefly mention, because Picard takes such a turn from the child to nemesis when Troi has that mind violation and he like makes her stay on duty. But I think that really is like, we actually discussed this in our episode in ethics in Picard that we were on before this, but it really is just like insane because it's just the writing, like this is not Picard in that moment, and it is clear that like they didn't know the character, because if they had seen that episode in the child and they had seen these other moments where he is protecting Troy's autonomy, then that scene just makes no sense characterization wise. And so that's sort of the like standout anomaly between him and Troi. But I think otherwise they have like such a wonderful working and just like even just close friendship, relationships. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, moving on to the other main woman of TNG, and that is Dr. Beverly Crusher. Now, I gotta admit to you guys, when I wrote this list of like episodes to talk about, I was really just pulling stuff off the top of my head. And then when I watched these episodes I picked for Beverly, I'm like, there's not really a whole lot of Picard and Beverly in them. But the reason I picked them is because I think they're standout episodes for the type of character that Beverly is and what she's good at. Instead of focusing, because so many people, when you talk about Picard and Crusher, you talk about their romantic relationship or their feelings they have for each other. And I didn't really want to do that in this discussion. I wanted to talk about Beverly as a doctor and why it was so important to have her on the Enterprise. So the first episode I picked was Conspiracy, which is the one where these parasitic bugs take over the head honchos at Starfleet. And the most interesting I think about this episode when it has to do with Crusher is that when the one admiral comes on to the Enterprise, the bug he brings with him is intended for Dr. Crusher. And I think that shows how much value she is to this crew and how much value she is to these other beings that they would want to take her over first before taking over the rest of the ship, So first off, did you guys watch the episode? And what do you think about Crusher and her value as a doctor on the Enterprise? Rhianna?
Yeah, I loved this episode. We watched it recently for our spooky series because it's very spooky.
Yeah.
But it's really fun to look at an episode at a completely different angle. And this is really interesting to look at Crusher because in the beginning of this episode, we have sort of their connection with their friend. I forgot his name. Walker? Yeah, Walker.
Yes.
I was just going to think of the Texas Ranger and then it's there. But so once they're like, they get to talk a little bit about Walker, and he was a very close friend of Picard and Jack Crusher, and of course Beverly by extension. We find out that Walker was like the person to introduce Beverly to Picard, which is really historic. And so it's really interesting that we combine in this episode sort of a personal aspect of their relationship, and then later on, of course, she's being like a badass when everyone else is getting taken down by this admiral who's controlled by the bug. Like, she just comes in with a phaser and is not getting bugs today. Like, she is too strong for that, and it's just really cool to see because she's definitely like getting a doctor on their side would be really advantageous and could have been really messy had she gotten like possessed as well.
Yeah, I think in this episode they're gunning for Beverly because a doctor is the only person who could override a captain in certain situations because like CMO has ultimate power. It's like, oh well, I think you're unfit to command. Come here, let me give you a little bug, and now you're fit to command. Yeah, I think this episode's great. And throughout TNG, we see that Beverly is amazing at trusting her instincts. And when she thinks something is not right, she is usually correct. And there's something fishy going on. So, yeah, at that moment of her with the phaser, like she's outdoing Worf. She's the security officer and the CMO at that moment.
Yeah, totally.
David, your thoughts on conspiracy?
This is one of those episodes that is in season 1 of Star Trek: The Next Generation that I always like to say is probably on the lower end as far as episodes go.
I mean, for season 1, it's a
compared
little
to
higher.
Season 1
Yeah.
episodes,
Yeah, I think it's
a
one of the
little
better
higher,
ones
you
of
know?
season 1, but overall, yeah.
Yeah.
But I will give Dr. Crusher credit, and just to talk about her in more of a macro sense, it's a testament to one, her skills as a physician, and throughout the series you saw her doing a lot of high level medical science, and that was really something special to see a doctor on the starship, not just being a doctor, but being a medical science who was on the cutting edge. It was something that they did a lot with Dr. Bashir on DS9, but that started with Beverly Crusher on The Next Generation, where she was a leading medical scientist because she was on the Enterprise, the flagship of the Federation. So it made sense that she was one of the best doctors and one of the leading medical sciences, one of the leading medical scientists in Starfleet. And you could tell that their relationship aside, Jean-Luc really had the utmost respect for Beverly as a physician, despite him not liking the doctor very much or having to be told what to do. He, at the end of the day, would always respect the chief medical officer for her skills.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, you spoke about her being a leading scientist in the Federation, being the chief medical officer on the Enterprise. And that's why I picked the second episode to focus on for Beverly, which is the best of both worlds, because in this we're dealing with the Borg. They had never dealt with a human assimilated by the Borg before. So Beverly is the first doctor to deal with Borg implants and their effect on the human body, and then ultimately figuring out how to remove them from Picard. And one of the things I noticed while rewatching this was that she was very focused on the fact that she could save Picard. You know, she never wavered on, oh, well, he's just given over to the Borg or anything like that. She always believed in her own skills that she could do this and she could figure out a way to save him. And then the scene in part 2 when they have him in Data's lab and Data and Troi and Beverly are all there. I think it really helped having both Troi and Beverly there to help bring his consciousness back out away from the Borg collective. So what did you guys think about Crusher and her role in the best of both worlds?
Yeah, Heather, I'm really glad you brought up this episode because I think like at first glance I wouldn't think of it as like an integral Beverly moment, but the more I'm like considering the fact that she literally brought him back to his humanity, and yes, although Data was the like physical tether, that helped bring him back, I think that like he needed the emotional guides of Troi and Beverly to be there to say like your family is here, and especially having Crusher being there to like literally put him back together and to get these implants off of him and kind of reassert his humanity is so essential. And I think that overall too, Beverly just has such skill when it comes to like alien physiology and everything. I mean, if we think about it, especially in comparison to like all we knew before TNG was TOS, and no shade to McCoy, I love McCoy, but like he barely even like wanted to work on Spock, half Vulcan, half human, like he did not clearly have a lot of interest and or like excitement in like trying out new alien physiologies and stuff, and he would when he was forced to, but Bev is like seeking that out, and she is like making sure that she's up to date on every single new person or crew member who comes aboard, because who knows what species they're going to be, and she has to be ready. And so I think the fact that like she is one of the first to be working with the Borg and reasserting humanity for the Borg is like incredible. Like leading scientist here, you know. So it's really cool that we get to talk about her through that angle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, David, yeah, thank you for initially bringing up everything about her being a leading scientist, because I'm thinking now this is the first time we've ever seen someone attempt to bring someone back from the Borg once they've been assimilated. And so she has the leading technique. Like, this is what everyone else is going to build on when we have more people assimilated later. And I'm sure in Wolf 359, many people were assimilated. So I just think it's amazing that she was able to do this, obviously with the help of her, with the rest of the crew. But yeah, I just love Bev. And also, like, he doesn't even come away with implants or anything. Like, first try, boom, like all good.
Just a band-aid.
Doctor
Just a band-aid.
Exactly. And he just rolled in the mud the next episode. He was good to go, you know? Go Bev. And also, like, she was able to separate the emotional attachment she had to him too, because that must have been so hard. Obviously, in Starfleet, you have to do that a lot, and that's part of your job, is being able to kind of compartmentalize things. But when I mean, I was emotional just watching him in that state, not even knowing who he was, and she just powered through.
Yeah. David, your thoughts on the best of both worlds and Crusher's role of the Borg?
I think that this is one of those episodes that is really a testament not just to Star Trek, but to sci-fi in general. I think Beverly does a great job of maintaining composure while Locutus is still there. And it's up to her to formulate a strategy of how to get Jean-Luc back from Locutus. And she does a really good job of putting all of that together. And it's a lot of really high level stuff. And you really see how bright and intelligent she really is, and how she's on the leading edge. And like I said, she's a leader in her field. And Jean-Luc had his life saved multiple times by her. And that she's invaluable, quite frankly. She's invaluable. There, Heather, I said something nice about Dr. Crusher.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any other thoughts or things they want to add about Dr. Crusher before we move on?
Yeah, I wanted to quickly note too that even through their differences, like Picard and Beverly do have a lot of times where they're disagreeing on Prime Directive stuff mainly, but also like certain medical procedures and if it's ethical. Or Picard is always like team like let the person die if they don't know anything about the Prime Directive, you know, like if they're not warp capable and they've found out about it, like Beverly wants to save them every time, and so she'll beam them aboard. I'm thinking First Contact, I'm thinking like so many episodes.
Who Watches the Watchers?
Yeah. There's literally so many where, you know, Picard is pretty furious that she made this decision, but they never let it completely like ruin their friendship or ruin their professionalism for each other. And that's like really hard to do, especially when you have such different like ethical grounds that you're standing on, because Beverly of course is standing on like the actual like Hippocratic oath and the oath she took as a physician, which I think always just supersedes her oath as like a Starfleet member towards the Prime Directive. But Picard, of course, is like Prime Directive poster boy, you know? And so it's, I think, really interesting to see the two of them debate on this stuff and to see how they navigate that. And it's so beautiful how they're able to still have a discourse and have a dialogue about it, because that's pretty rare. I think like at least a lot of other doctors and captains might be butting heads.
I also thank you, Rhianna, for bringing up those points. And I also just want to shout out the episode Remember Me. I was hesitant whether to bring this up or not, because technically it's all in Bev's head, but he treats her with such respect during that episode. So at least it shows you how she's expecting Picard to react, because the whole plot of that episode is people are disappearing before her eyes. And she realizes that at the end, she's the only one on the Enterprise and she's caught in a bubble. But at first, when she's telling everybody, like, Wesley's gone, like, I just saw this crewman vanish, and really no one is believing her. And Picard is one of the few people to take her seriously. And so, again, I know it's all in her head, but it still shows that that's probably what Picard would do in that situation as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I love how you brought up how they do have differences a lot when it comes to the Prime Directive and what's medically because one of my like guilty pleasure episodes, because I love Crusher as a character so much, is from season 1, the episode where they meet those 2 planets, and it's like the Reagan say no to drugs episode.
Yeah,
drug episode.
Symbiosis.
Yeah,
Mhm.
symbiosis. But I love how Beverly really comes she comes really strong at Picard in that episode, and it's like, they're addicted to this drug, we can help them, and Picard comes very strongly with the Prime Directive, no, we can't interfere, yada yada yada. But it always stuck in my head as to, like, you know, she stands her ground with him, even if they don't agree. She still is willing to speak up and stand her ground, and that's important.
Yeah, and even in Encounter at Farpoint, you know, there's that moment where she brings Wesley onto the bridge, and first he's okay with it because he's happy to see Crusher, but then, like, he's all pissed off and he yells at the both of them, even though she's like, well, my son was correct. Like, there is a proximity alert, you know, like, boom. And he sort of, like, comes back a little bit and a little bit, like, embarrassed with himself and says to Beverly, like, I'm sorry I yelled at you and your son, and really should be giving Wesley the apology, but that's a whole other discussion. But
Shut up,
true,
Wesley.
like, yeah, like, it's not going to get better from here for him, but like,
No.
at least with Beverly, he creates this sort of olive branch to say, sorry, I was stressed, like, I definitely was just, like, not expecting you. He even offers, like, if you want to be reassigned, I will happily let that happen. And it's just really great that I've seen this trend in Picard, especially when it comes to his interactions with women, which we'll talk about, like, a lot more with the show Picard, but how he will make these mistakes and then realize that, whether through their prompting or through his own just realization of, oh my gosh, like, I did not treat her the best way I could have, and then he'll always come back to that. And so I just wanted to point out that as we keep talking, because it's definitely a trend we see, and that's, you know, humanity. That's who we are. We make mistakes and we hopefully learn from them, and Picard is one of those people who really does, and that's partially because Beverly is nudging him in the right direction. And Troi.
Yes. All right, before we move on to the ladies of Star Trek Picard, does anyone have any other particular TNG characters they wanted to mention? David Pulaski.
Well, I would like to talk about Dr. Catherine Pulaski, and in particular the episode Samaritan Snare, because this is the episode where Dr. Pulaski saves Jean-Luc's life by performing surgery to fix his artificial heart. And I think that this is a great character study for Jean-Luc, who always wants to be seen as this authoritarian figure who's always in control and always in command of the situation. But when something happens that is out of his control, he really doesn't know what to do with it, and he has to rely on someone else. And it's Dr. Pulaski who, kind of in her own kind of sassy way, tells him to relax and chill out. I got this. I'm the foremost expert on heart surgery. I can take care of this. And that's part of why I like Dr. Pulaski so much, is that she has kind of a sassy kind of charisma that Jean-Luc doesn't really always know what to do with. And I always found that very charming. And at the end of this episode, Samaritan Snare, she reminds Jean-Luc that the crew still sees him as invincible. He's still the captain. Everything's fine. And she took care of the surgery, no problem. And I just think that was a really great job on her part to show that even though she's not, she may not always take Jean-Luc so seriously, because he takes himself a little too seriously, that her heart's still in the right place.
Yeah, no pun intended.
The pun is always intentional.
Good.
The pun is always intended.
I'm so glad. Yeah, David, that's such a good point, and I definitely am not much of a Pulaski lover, so you're kind of changing my mind, helping me to see her in a different light, because, like, obviously there are scenes where I'm like, what? Like, she had sex with Riker's dad? Like, I'm very confused and scared, But then there's other moments, like, actually, I can't believe I'm mentioning the child again, but that's her first, episode where she comes on board. And she like does not report to Picard, and he's so pissed off. He like comes in about to give her a lecture, and she's like, listen to me, we have a situation. I know I didn't do protocol, but like Troi needs your help right now. And so she just gets right down to business and makes him realize, hey, some things are more important than protocol. And so I like that she is able to put him in his place a little, because Picard needs that sometimes, frankly. He's got a little bit of an ego, and that comes from being captain and being right like 90% of the time, maybe 85. So it's really interesting to see how Pulaski can bring that out when really not a lot of other people can.
Yeah, David, I think you said it best. Picard is just so confused around her because he's like, I don't know my place with you. You like act so confident, and she doesn't like meet him at his level. She's like, hi, I'm Pulaski. Welcome, And, I love seeing. It's rare to see Picard that way, but she pulls it out of him every time.
Totally.
All right. That's good enough for me, Heather. That's good enough for me.
Just a little, I don't get a bunch of Pulaski fans either, so I'm very happy to hear this. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I'm not the biggest Pulaski fan, but I am a huge fan of Lwaxana Troi. So I just wanted to mention her, since I let David talk about Pulaski. Lwaxana is so forward and out there, but Picard still has such a respect for her because she's Deanna's mother and because she's an ambassador to Beta Z. So he has a professionalism, whereas some people would look at Lwaxana and be like, no, get the hell off my ship. I don't want you here. You're crazy, So I think that like the relationship between Picard and him really shows how he approaches women in general, is that he always approaches them with a professionalism and willing to respect and hear their views. And that's important.
Yeah, and it's something that I really admire, like talking about Deanna Troi as well, is Ashlyn and I were kind of discussing like what other episodes would be good to bring up for Troi, and we really were also just talking about what a great like sort of medium mitigator. Again, she's the middle ground here that Picard needs between her mother and Picard, and I think that sometimes obviously it's not the most fun to be that role as a child. You don't always want to be playing go between your mom and your captain, but like this is what she has to do, and she does it so beautifully. And there are times where Lwaxana is just to Picard being absolutely crazy, like he just sees her as like, oh my gosh, she's back, like what shenanigans is she going to do this time? And Troi is so graceful. Deanna Troi is so graceful at like sort of helping them through that middle ground, and just also telling Lwaxana where the boundaries are, like the hard boundaries. Like, no, you cannot ask me, my captain, to like go on these dates and stuff. Please do not court him. Like, I'm begging you, So it's so wonderful, though. I love getting to see Lwaxana, also just in general, because she brings, again, such a different side out of Picard, where he's kind of shy, which we never see. Like, he's so confident usually, but only Lwaxana can bring that sort of like just little boy who's like, I don't know how to talk to women. Like, she's scary. Like he will only do Shakespeare and that's it. Like, it's just glorious. I just love Lwaxana so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Rhianna, thank you for bringing that up. There's some interesting power dynamic going on in their interactions, because she's always dropping like what he's supposedly thinking, like, oh, John Luke, how can you be thinking of me that way? And then like he's not,
or if he is, like it's
maybe
a stray thought.
He thought it, and then she's just been going year after year on him. But I exactly what you said. He really kind of closes up, and I think part of it is he doesn't want to like unleash his opinion because he's got to stay professional, but also she does hold that power over him where he just like, I don't know what to say to you right now. So yeah, there's some interesting interactions that they have.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. All right, so we are going to move on to new business now, and that is Star Trek Picard and the wonderfully strong women of Star Trek Picard. Now, I wanted to focus specifically on Commander Raffi Musker and 7 of 9, of course. But there's so many other characters that we can talk about them along the way. Let's start with Raffi, because I think there's, out of all the episodes I gave you to look at, there's one that really focuses on Raffi and the dynamic between the two of them, and that is from Picard season 1, The End is the Beginning. You get to see how they work together before, during the Romulan evacuation, and really what Picard did to her after the attack on Mars and him resigning in Starfleet, and he really hung her out to dry, and that's sent Raffi on like a tailspin down a rabbit hole of addiction and despair, and she really has a lot of anger towards Picard when we first meet her. How did you feel about Picard's history with Raffi and how he treated her, Rhianna?
Okay, well, I have a very strong opinion about this, so I apologize.
That's okay.
I'm gonna
We
get
like
on my
strong opinions.
We love strong opinions here. We
love
them.
strong opinions.
Yeah, I'm getting on my Raffi stand because I absolutely love her, and I really liked her from the first time I saw her, and I feel like my opinion is kind of in the minority. A lot of people really did not, at least that I was talking to while watching Picard, were not big Raffi fans because she's a very hard shell. She's got these kind of like different issues that maybe we don't see in a lot of Starfleet officers, or if we don't see them, then it's not, at least not right away, you know, because so much of Star Trek is painted as, look at all these successful, amazing, put together Starfleet officers, you know, and when you bring a character like Raffi into the picture, it really shows how damaging Starfleet can be, and by proxy, people who are like so devoted to Starfleet like Picard was for so long. And so I really love the fact that we get a beautiful flashback into how their relationship used to be, and this is like the notorious amazing time when she starts calling him JL, and the whole fandom rioted because they're like, what, no one calls him that, you know. But yeah. Right away that shows a very, very different relationship that we're seeing, a very close relationship that has been building throughout these years. And I have like a tiny bit of background because I read The Last Best Hope by Una McCormack, which, you know, just yep. Such a good book, and yep. Really highlights Raffi and his relationship during the evacuation plan and everything. But I think more so now in the show, we're seeing the ramifications of his sort of like just complete disregard of the people around him and the ways in which he did not treat them the way that they deserve to be treated. And this is not just a Raffi thing. This is going to be a Riker and Troi thing that we're going to see in Nepenthe. And it's like we're learning throughout these episodes that Picard has pretty much just abandoned all of his old friends and really just gone into his shell, into hiding, similar to what Raffi did. And so really, like, watching these scenes again, through the scope, I mean, we realize just how similar they are. And I know that like made you seem surprising, but like truly they are both such hard shells, and they're so like closed off when they want to be and when they have to be. And definitely Raffi right now is in just like survivor mode. She is not thriving. She's just like literally surviving, and Picard is as well. And so they're both handling this very differently. And I think that it's especially telling that when Picard comes to her, it's only because he finally needs something from her. And it's not to apologize after all of these years. And we even see in the flashback that he just laughed off her Tal Shiar idea. Mm-hmm. No, Raffi, you're ridiculous. Like, there's no way the Tal Shiar is involved with this, which of course they were. And yeah. Raffi was right all along. And I will tell anyone who forgets that Raffi was correct from day one.
Absolutely, she was.
Yeah, and she got fired because of that, like not just because of the Tal Shiar stuff, but because of Picard's actions. was, then trickled down to her. She said, of course, like, quote, "My ass is getting fired now." And he never touched base with her, never really checked in about what was going on with her family. And as Raffi describes, this long, slow slide into humiliation, like, that's truly what her life has felt like. And I think Picard has felt that way, but they've just been feeling it separately because they don't communicate. Both of them are such bad communicators that they are so similar that they can't like interact in these healthy ways until they learn how to talk to one another. And I think it's so beautiful that as the season goes on, once again we see Picard kind of coming in embarrassed by his behavior, and but he needs these women to tell him because he's so lost and he's so off course of who he used to be in Starfleet. So yeah, I just want to really shout out to Raffi because she's so incredible, and to have a character come on who's flawed and who is like hardened by the world. Like so many of us were going into this like Picard happened during COVID, like when it started, when we're all like everyone's life was sort of falling apart. And so Raffi was really like, I just resonated with her so much because she had real life issues that like Star Trek never gets to talk about. And so anyway, I'll let others speak, but yeah, I just love Raffi, and I'm so glad that they like actually can try to repair their relationship after all this.
See,
I co-sign on everything Rhianna just said.
Yay, thank you.
I love Raffi.
Yes,
100%.
we love Raffi.
Yes, okay. Yes.
Whenever Raffi's brought up, I just let Rhianna take it away because she crushes it every time. I will say, like, I just also have to applaud the writers of just like the creating the character of Raffi and also where she's placed in Picard, because we obviously have not seen anything that's happened since the end of Next Generation, but just understanding and getting little glimpses of how the relationship is, we understand that Picard is just so consumed with his own like tortured life. Like, he's not in Starfleet. He was fired. He didn't know. He can't even think about anyone else other than himself, which I think in Next Generation, we didn't really see that. Like, yeah, he was very close and private, but he did care about other people and he reached out to people, but he's so stuck in self-isolation. And it's wild to have the show be showing us this and not telling us this. So I just really think it's great. And yeah, thanks, Rhianna. You said it all.
Co-sign.
Yeah.
Well, I know you have lots of thoughts about Raffi too, but before I let you go into those, David, I just want to say that I am a big believer of, as much as I love Raffi and I love watching their relationship slowly repair over season 1 and into season 2, I feel like he never actually really apologized to her, and I feel like he owes her an apology.
Yeah, period.
100%, 100%. Yeah.
You're right about that, Heather. Jean-Luc definitely owes her an apology, because for a long time when we saw the flashback, it was pretty clear that she was Jean-Luc's right hand when Will Riker wasn't around anymore. And she depended on him and he depended on her. And Jean-Luc being himself, always being so private and isolated, he probably took her for granted. And that's something that really needs to be repaired. And I'm glad we're going to see Raffi in season 3 with the chance of that being rectified.
For sure. Yeah, she needs that. They both need it, I think. They need that closure, because wounds like that stay, like I've definitely experienced friendships who the friends will come and go, obviously, but when they're so non-communicative, then it makes it so much harder for Raffi to even understand why like he's not responding and why he's not reaching out. And then of course you internalize and you think, oh, it's because of me. And Raffi is already doing so much of that like self-hatred stuff that him not seeing that is sort of still indicative of his emotional immaturity here that we're seeing in Picard, and that like season 2 is starting to unravel that and help him to open up more, because he needs that, and I think his friendships will go stronger if he does that.
I think also it's not only emotional immaturity. I think he's afraid to face Raffi, because I'm sure he's thought about her hundreds of times. Whenever he thinks about his whole dismissal from Starfleet, Raffi, of course, is caught up in that picture. And the reason he's never gone to see her is because then he would have to apologize and he would have to admit his failings. And he's not ready to do that to himself. So why would he do that for Raffi? So it makes it even more astounding that he hasn't had like a real good sit down with her. So I'm hoping we have some closure on that whole crazy scenario.
Ashlyn, I loved your point about Jean-Luc being afraid, because I think that is a really good highlight, because a point was brought up earlier about Jean-Luc and his professionalism with how he approaches women, with Lwaxana being an example. And it reminded me of his relationship with Laris, because that one is also very complex. It's one where he maintains a level of professionalism despite having feelings for her. And I think that goes back to him always being so guarded. And it's the same with Raffi. He doesn't know how to be anything other than Starfleet professional. And it takes time for him, that we see in season 2 of Picard, for him to open up to these people, to open up to Raffi, to open up to Laris. And it's a real testament to how we're seeing Jean-Luc evolve, and I think that's needed. He needed to be something that he was, something different from what he was in The Next Generation. You can't be the same character you were 20 years ago, and bringing someone like Raffi or Laris into his life is a real opportunity to see him grow.
Yes, snaps for that.
Absolutely,
Agreed.
yes.
So, one last point I wanted to make about Raffi. How did you feel seeing her go from where she was in season 1 to rejoining Starfleet in season 2? Because that made me feel so proud of her, that she really went on that path to get her life back together and go back into Starfleet.
Yeah, that's not an easy journey. I think especially going back to a place that has hurt you in the past, and knowing that, like, what if this turns out the same, and taking those fears into account, like, that's such bravery to be able to face that again. And Starfleet obviously is not for everybody, and it's like, it wasn't super Elnor's calling, even though she kind of pushed him in that direction. And so it's just really interesting to see Raffi be able to stand up to those fears and hope that this time will be different. And of course it was, because now she is like opening up herself to more opportunities and having a crew who is like loving and knows her and knows what she needs, you know. And I think that's what she was lacking when maybe her and Picard were out there saving Romulans. They had no time for emotionality and these big long talks about, are we doing okay? Like, no one was doing okay. Romulus was dying. Like, it's not, none of that was easy. And I think that, like, the only guidance she probably got through that time was like the Qowat Milat, but even then they're busy with their own stuff, doing, you know, world saving things all the time. So I thought that was just really cool to see all of Raffi's glow ups, you know, like both in professional and like in her personal relationship with Seven is just like so special. And yeah, I just am very proud of her.
Yeah, same. I'm on the proud train.
Yes. Very proud.
I think also seeing like how, especially in season 1, she's really, you see her actively fighting her addiction. She's locking herself out of her like ability to order alcohol from the replicator. I think is really strong and really hard to do. But I think she's moving again. She has a goal in her life. She's not just in her house all day, every day. Like all of us we came out of our houses and we're living life, you know? So Raffi's really been a source of inspiration for me as well. Just like, what an icon.
Yes, an absolute icon. Now, speaking of her interpersonal relationships, the next person I want to talk about is someone who I love very dearly, and I love Raffi very much, but Seven of Nine, I think when they decided to bring Seven onto Picard, I think that was the best decision they could have ever made, because her being a former Borg and Picard also having his history as Locutus, I think they really bonded over that shared trauma. and there's a lot of examples of that in her first episode in season 1, Stardust City Rag. What did you think of that episode and how her and Picard, I think, really connected?
Yeah, I really liked seeing their first discussion in his like sort of pseudo chateau holodeck thing he's got going, because she is just so who she is. Like Seven is just like really grown into herself, and obviously this is the first time we're seeing her since Voyager, and I like cannot stop grinning the entire time I'm watching this episode because it's Seven, and like she is like the most human obviously we've ever seen her, and she has this whole arc where she's now a Fenris Ranger, and I love that even Raffi and Rios are like talking about how metal she is. They're like, that's 7 of 9. Like she's from
Literally
the Delta
metal.
Quadrant. Yeah. Literally metal. Literally badass metal. Like she is so cool and everyone knows it. And so it's really interesting to hear her and Picard go back and forth because they have like basically opposite ideologies. Like he does not like the Rangers. Or at least not, it's probably not a dislike, it's just a disapprove because it's not like above board. Oh, yeah, they're not doing it in regulation, and he loves regulations for the most part.
Yeah.
Even though he's breaking a lot of rules here in Picard. So they have that in common. You know, they're both kind of in this very desperate situation where a lot of stuff has gone wrong in the past few days for the both of them. And so I like that they can kind of, I don't know, just like shoot the shit together a little and just be kind of like, we're both hardened by things. We both know how hard the world is. And that 7 of 9 is just like, give me a scotch. Like, let's go. We need to talk about like what you're doing out here and all this stuff. And I think that it's really interesting too that then they have that discussion about like revenge and everything after in the end of Stardust City Rag, especially because she goes through with it, even though Picard is giving this great speech about how revenge is not good for the soul and you won't feel better, all that stuff. It is really reminiscent of the times that she would just blatantly ignore Janeway. You know, like Seven has always been her own person making these decisions. Like it's not surprising to me that Picard couldn't really get through to her either when it's that ingrained, you know?
Yeah, that was lovely. I think you bring up an interesting point, Rhianna, because when I think about Seven and Picard, I don't think about them as really being similar characters, but there's something about that scene where like every time they interact, I feel like they have an understanding of each other. And I think because they both have been through a lot of crazy situations, and here they are again in another one. And so there's this like I don't know. They're just like, let's get down to business. Let's figure out what to do. Let's make it happen. And I really love the kinship that forms between them. And I just again I can't believe 7 of 9 is on my screen. One of my favorite characters.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just a great choice to have her in the show.
I really appreciated the more quiet moments they had when at the end of the episode, Seven was like, keep saving the galaxy, Picard, because she realizes that the galaxy needs someone with the heart of Jean-Luc Picard. Even though she's a bit more hardened and cynical, the world needs somebody like Jean-Luc Picard. And the two of them connected in more quieter moments because of what they endured through the Borg and losing their humanity and fighting to get it back. And that's something that is really relatable between the two of them in a lot of ways. And we see the arc of the XBs in Picard, and it's something that really, really resonates, where you see that they're both victims and they understand each other. And I thought that was really, really cool that in the quieter moments where there wasn't as much going on, they were able to find common ground.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite scenes with the two of them is in Stardust City Rag and that end scene there. But when she looks at him and asks him, like, how long did it take for you to get your humanity back? And he replies to her, it hasn't really been, gotten fully back. Like I think that's just a way, like she needed a little bit of validation as to how she was feeling, that she didn't completely feel like her humanity was there. And Picard gave that to her in saying, it doesn't get fully back, or at least I don't feel that way. So it's okay that you don't feel that way either. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I want to also speak on something that you said, David, about like the fact that Seven really respects what Picard does, like keep on saving, the galaxy. I think that they are each saving the galaxy in the ways that they know how, and the ways that feel most rewarding, and for Seven, it's being a part of the Fenris Rangers. And I have a little pin that I got from Women at Warp in Mission Chicago. There's a little Fenris Rangers pin that I can hopefully click, and 7 of 9 will be here. I don't know. That's the hope, at least. But yeah, I think that like the fact that they both are kind of have the saving people thing, they both have that complex of, we actually, like, once you start to save people and see how rewarding it is, and how just like, they do it in different ways though. And I love that they're both okay with that, and they complement each other in that way. It's really special.
Yes, very special. One thing, like going into season 2, I think I enjoyed seeing Seven play a bigger role in season 2, because we were dealing more with the Borg Queen directly, and her feelings about being an XB, which we saw a little of that at the end of season 1. But in season 2, you get to see how much it affects her, especially in the second episode when she wakes up without her implants, and how she really enjoys the difference between how people treat her with implants and how people treat her without them. So I wonder, do you think like she has some resentment towards Picard because all of his implants got taken out and he doesn't have to live with them like she does?
I think that could definitely be a contributing factor. I think like the whole relationship with the Borg is like something so hard to unpack. And she does have this respect for him, both as a captain, because he is Admiral Captain Jean-Luc Picard, but also he's Locutus to her, and she knows him through that Borg connection. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some resentment. We see so many times in Voyager, like in Unimatrix, is that right? Unimatrix Part 1 and 2. Yeah, and then
0, yeah.
Yeah, Unimatrix 0. And then also in like Human Error, like where she's on the holodeck imagining her life, and she doesn't have her implants in either of those situations, and she's a completely different person. And so when we get to see her in season 2, she's confident, she's strong, and she has no fear about being herself. And I love seeing her this way, and it makes me so sad that this is like her implants are what's holding her back from being more confident and being who she really is. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if there was some resentment about that, because Beverly was on the scene cutting out those implants right away with Picard.
The EMH did his best.
He did.
he did. But he's no Beverly.
Well, and
Seven
assimilated,
was like, yeah.
When she was a baby. So she grew up with 6. Those systems. Yeah. 7. You were 6, yeah.
6.
But anyway, so any other ladies of Picard that you would like to mention, or any other specific moments you want to bring up right now?
I did talk a little bit about Laris.
Yes, Laris.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was curious what you all thought about her relationship with him at the end of season 2, and that whole like almost kiss thing.
It is really something to watch, to see Jean-Luc open up to a woman that he cares about, because that's never an easy thing to do. Trust me, I know. And Jean-Luc has always been this very guarded, isolated person, but he develops feelings for Laris, and the feelings are reciprocated. And despite her being a Romulan and being there to protect him after the supernova, they clearly, even from the beginning, have more of a connection than originally let on. And that's a struggle for Jean-Luc because he's always been so guarded. And that was really the main arc of season 2, was to get him to learn how to express himself more. And for Laris to be the catalyst for that, it was very special for the character. It's something we haven't really ever seen, or maybe we've seen in spurts in single episodes, but not to this degree.
I think one thing that Laris really held in season 2 of Picard is the idea that you never really understand how much someone means to you until they're gone. Because I don't think Picard would have ever gotten to the point of opening up to her and being honest with her like he did at the end of season 2 if in the beginning of the second episode of season 2 she was dead in that alternate universe. And so as we went through season 2 and he dealt with the Watcher, who looked remarkably like Laris, and opened up to someone who was very much a placeholder for Laris, he realized how much he needed, or he realized what he lost in that, and that he didn't want to lose her, and that it was more important for him to open up to someone than to lose them.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah, great points.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Yeah, Laris is definitely an underrated character, and I am concerned that we're not going to get any time with her in Picard season 3. I'm afraid they're going to do what they did to the rest of the season 2 cast, but we shall see if she'll be back. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about Laris being in season 3.
A cameo would be nice.
Oh.
Anything? Just a morsel, please.
Yeah, I hope we get to see her at some point, because she is really an important character, and I think as much as Raffi and Seven are very important, and I'm glad we will get to see them in season 3, I think Laris is the third one that we should see in season 3. So I'm gonna be a little disappointed if we don't.
Yeah, same. I was wondering if. Oh, sorry. I was wondering if we could talk briefly about Nepenthe, and since we get to kind of talk about Troi again,
yes.
In their growing relationship or dwindling, it's really interesting coming into Picard, expecting him to be friends with everyone and be very close with his bridge crew, and to see that he hasn't seen them. He hasn't seen them pretty much. I think Thad was 5 when he last saw him, and so their son was alive when they last spoke, or at least were together, and Kestra was probably way younger, or barely a baby, all this kind of stuff. And so it's just fascinating to see that their relationship has completely changed, and yet when they come back together, it's like no time has passed. And one of the most beautiful scenes is when Troi just they just hug, and she just cradles his face, and she just knows instantly you're in trouble, and she knows that he's dying. All of that, of course, just from her abilities, and because she knows Picard, and she sees that he's carrying so much. And it's so fascinating to see the two of them interact, because Troi is just so graceful and so beautiful, and loving and just accepting of the place he is right now, and really not blaming him for the lack of communication that they've had.
Yeah, I think that's really remarkable, because she's the opposite reaction of Raffi. Raffi's just how could you leave me like this? And Troi should be saying the same thing. My son died. I assume he was not even at a funeral of any kind. They basically uprooted their lives to move to Nepenthe. The Rikers have been going through a lot, and Picard is just, he can't bear to be with them. And so it's wonderful to see Troi just does not hold any grudges. She understands this is Jean-Luc. I know what he's about. And they have a really moving scene when they're in Thad's bedroom, and Picard's looking at all of his possessions, and she's kept it just as it has been, and we see her get really emotional about losing her son. And I think it helps Picard to realize like, oh, this is something else I should have been doing, is checking up on my friends. But I think he's really lucky to have Troi and Riker in his life, so they can just understand what he's coming from. Like he was dealt a devastating blow, and they were as well.
I think that what you brought up a great point about how Jean-Luc has to learn that I need to keep up better tabs with my people from being in Thad's room. I think, and Heather, here's a segue for you, we're going to see a lot more of that in season 3. We're going to see the idea that Jean-Luc really needs to keep better contact with his bridge crew and his friends.
Yes, I think that is definitely something that we will hopefully see in season 3. And speaking of season 3, we are going to move into upcoming business now, which has to do with season 3 and what you guys think we are going to see, what's going to happen with these old characters from Jean-Luc's past with all of the TNG crew returning, and these new characters from his present, like Raffi and Seven, and how they're really going to mix together to tell this story. What do you think is going to happen in season 3, Rhianna?
Oh, I hope really great things. I'm like so excited to see everyone back. I am hoping that they'll bring back Kestra. I hope they can get the same actor, and just like, which brought she's older by now, and so I would just love to see. I know that like they probably, if they did something, it would be a quick cameo because they've got so much seemingly to do this season. But along with Kestra, I would of course just love to see how the Rikers are doing, how Deanna is like faring. It's just so hard to lose a child, and like also probably leaving Kestra for a certain amount of time to do whatever world altering stakes they're going to be doing in season 3. So I'm curious about how like also her and Seven are going to interact, and like her and Raffi and everything, because it's so interesting. Like it kind of reminds me of those like birthday parties you would have as a kid, where you just bring all your friends from all your different walks of life, like your soccer friends or meeting your church friends or meeting your school friends. And it's kind of like, this is weird. I don't know how you all are going to get along, but I hope that like you do, because they're, Picard obviously needs all of them in different ways, and they all serve very different functions and like different purposes for the plot, and also just for like how they are in Jean-Luc's life and everything. So I think it's going to be really cool to see just legends of these like incredible women. I mean, Beverly hanging out with 709 just sounds like the coolest thing. Like, what a sentence, So I'm really excited to see that. And I don't know if we're going to get another Guinan. Probably not, because we got our fill of Guinan season 2. But like, just as many women, like we're saying, Laris, please bring her back, even just for a cameo or just a goodbye or something. I don't know. Yeah, because there are so many powerful women in this show, and there's so much potential for all of them to just like kick ass together. So yeah, I'm excited.
I loved your birthday I loved your birthday party analogy, because that's exactly how I see it. I feel like this is probably going to be very awkward and uncomfortable for Jean-Luc, because he's going to have to deal with all of these people from various parts of his life who he has not had the best relationships with, and who he has not exactly kept up with. And that is most likely going to have to be addressed during this season. It's going to have to be addressed with Beverly Crusher, Troi, Raffi, and Seven. And all of them are going to have something to say to Jean-Luc. Your birthday party analogy about your friends from this place, from that place, I was thinking it was more like you're in a room and it's all of your exes sitting in one room. And you walk in and then suddenly it's like,
oh no,
this is weird. And I think that's what it's going to kind of be like in season 3, where he's going to have to come to terms with the fact that he needs to do better with keeping up with people in his life and not isolating so much.
I think both of you have amazing points. Yeah, I'm already laughing. I wish that Troi and Raffi already knew each other, because they are seemingly like so close with Picard, but I don't think they would have ever interacted at Starfleet, because Jean-Luc just kept his life like so separate. I hope we get a scene of all these badass ladies like running around. I love seeing like Bev with the phaser. I think the whole Crusher Picard situation is going to be really interesting. There is a mysterious like man on the poster that no one
Mhm.
knows, and there's been a lot of speculation that it's Picard's secret son. They're going the Kirk route, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Rhiannon and I have been joking that it's like Jordy got with, because no one wants Jordy with Leah Brahms, in my opinion. I like really don't want them to be together. And I made
Nobody wants
yeah,
that.
no one wants that. I made a joke on one of our podcasts that like he should be with anyone except her, like even the whale lady from Voyage Home. Like I would love to see them together. Like that's fine. Anyway, so that's going to be back to what David was saying about how Laris like was able to get Picard to trust a woman and kind of start opening up to her. I kind of think she was just used, and this is how Picard is now ready to trust people again, and now he will be ready for his relationship with Dr. Crusher. I have always shipped them, so we'll see if that happens. I don't know. But yeah, I just hope we get some really great scenes of them, maybe like making fun of him as they're on their adventure together. Season 3, I'm worried I have too high of expectations and it's going to disappoint me, but I could not be more excited.
Well, one of the interesting dynamics I pulled from like the trailers we've seen so far of season 3 is that it seems like some of the shots in the trailer are like Riker and Worf talking about Raffi and her temper. And so I'm wondering like if Raffi kind of rubs the TNG crew the wrong way. And I'm hoping that characters like Troi and Crusher will help bridge that gap between Raffi and Seven and the rest of the TNG crew.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I hope so, because I think like oftentimes women can understand female anger and female rage, and I think that Raffi has a lot of that, and understandably,
Yes.
she's been through a lot, and so is Seven, and they have a lot more like of a hardened personality than like sweet little Riker. You know, even Worf is a pacifist now, so like
Yeah.
everyone's in a very different part of their lives, and so I really love that idea, Heather. Like I really want them to, or what, Bev and Deanna to be like, we understand, we know how that anger goes, and like you're totally safe space to be reactive of however they need to be. You know, that'd be so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right. So we're going to wrap things up. Thank you, Rhianna and Ashley, so much for joining us. I think this was an incredible episode, a wonderful discussion. I loved having you guys on. Thank you so much. Can you tell everyone about your podcast, what you're doing lately, things like that, where they can find you online?
Sure. So this is our second appearance on Picard Week. Earlier in the week on Saturday, we talked about Stranded Picard, with just talking about every episode where he's just stranded on a planet. That will be live, so I hope you enjoyed that because it already happened. And then also we will be appearing on the ethics of Picard, hosted by Trek Untold. So catch us on those in Picard Week. Rhianna was also on the opening, so you can go ahead and rewatch that, where they talk about the Kelvin verse with TNG. And then on our main feed, we are currently in the holodeck series, and the way that our podcasts work is we go every series of Star Trek, starting with TOS, going all the way to Prodigy and all the new Trek that's out right now. And we look at it through a series theme. So we started out with the pilot episodes. Some great ones that we've done have been family episodes, time travel, feminism. So now we're doing holodeck episodes. Our Enterprise episode, yes, we have a very few couple of episodes that have holodecks on them. That will be coming out here in a couple weeks after all the Picard Week craziness is done. So we really appreciate having us on today. And Rhianna, will you remind people where they can hear us and find us on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. The Duras Sisters podcast is available on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, TikTok, YouTube. We have merch on Threadless as well, and we are also on Patreon. It's patreon.com/the Duras Sisters podcast. We have some awesome merch on there, as well as like goodies each month and just hours of listening content. So we are just so grateful to be on your show. This is the first time that we've gotten to meet you all. I think I met you all briefly at Mission Chicago, but everyone's running around doing crazy Star Trek things. So it's really nice to sit down and have such a lovely discussion with the both of you. And Ashlyn, of course, always.
Oh, thanks.
It was an absolute pleasure having both of you on.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Strange New Pod for hosting the Captain Picard Week Festival. Like I said at the start of the show, we are honored to be involved in it for the second year in a row. And, we are, as we proudly say, we are a tiny little independent podcast, but we like it that way. So we enjoy being involved in podcast festivals like this and getting to talk Star Trek with our new friends like you guys. So if you want to follow me online, it's at NerdyGal33 on Twitter. The podcast feed is at PromTrekPod. And David, where can people find you and what else are you doing?
Oh, if you feel like you can follow me at Call Me DJM. I'm not banned. I'm not getting any fights or anything. I'm not suspended. So you can follow me.
Lately?
Not in the last couple of weeks. So you can follow me at Call Me DJM, where you can hear about all of the other podcasts I do.
All right. So thank you everyone for joining us again. And as always, live long and kick ass.
Live logs and proper, baby.
Thank you.